Hey, if you were a fan of the band Tesla, I think you're going to enjoy what I have for you here today. Now, remember back in junior high school, there was a planetarium in our area, and there was a show that they brought there. I think it was called Zap. And as part of the show, they had this huge thing. It was called a Tesla coil. I remember they turned it on at one point. All these arcs of electricity came out of it. And there was actually, at one point in the show, a guy literally stood on top of this thing, put his hands up in the air, and arcs of electricity were coming out of his fingers. His hair was standing up. I mean, it was wild. And then I remember in physics, at one point we were talking about a Tesla coil, but that word, it never went much further than that. We just hear the word. Today, of course, the word Tesla is everywhere. But back then, it really wasn't that common, and we didn't associate it with a person named Nikola Tesla until all of a sudden, 1986, this band called Tesla just kind of shows up out of nowhere. And then we all kind of become more acquainted with this guy named Nikola Tesla because they named their band after this guy. And I think if you're like me, you remember when you first heard that song, Modern Day Cowboy, that was on this album, because it was just so great. It was so awesome. So I went out and immediately bought this album, Tesla Mechanical Resonance. And that song especially was just everywhere. And then, of course, they followed it up. I think the next single they put on there was Little Susie's on the Up. And it just ended up being this really, really amazing album. And it was released on December 8th of 1986. And then, I would have bought it not long after that because once I heard that song, I had this thing. And it was kind of interesting looking back at how these guys seem to come out of nowhere. And to really understand why these guys hit the way they did, you almost have to go back and look at what was going on that year in 1986. So listen to this for a second, and you can kind of see why they appeared and why they took off the way they did. So check this out. So that year, 1986, Master of Puppets comes out. Peace Sells, that was, of course, Metallica. Peace Sells, but Who's Buying? Megadeth. And Rain and Blood, Slayer. That comes out. And that really becomes kind of their first, where they kind of moved into more of the mainstream. And what helped them do that? Well, Rick Rubin produced it. But so you have this whole thing of kind of this heavier thrash metal kind of taking off in that moment. And then on the other side of the aisle, you have Slippery When Wet by Bon Jovi, Final Countdown, Look What the Cat Dragged In. Final Countdown, of course, is Europe. Look What the Cat Dragged In, Poison. And then Rat comes out with Dancing Undercover. So now you have kind of this pop metal that's over here, this other heavy slash metal that's kind of taking off over here. And then mixed in the middle of it, you have the Beastie Boys, Licensed to Ill, that comes out, which is also produced by Rick Rubin. And guess what else produced by Rick Rubin, or put together by Rick Rubin, comes out that year? Walk This Way with Aerosmith and Run DMC. So when you look at those things that are going on, then take a look at some of the more classic bands. Black Sabbath, at that moment, comes out. They come out with Seventh Star. And Black Sabbath, a lot of people at that moment are like, man, they have lost their way. Judas Priest comes out with Turbo, and a lot of Judas Priest followers, same thing, thinking, man, these guys have kind of lost their way. And then Van Halen and David Lee Roth had broken up by now. So Van Halen comes out with 5150. David Lee Roth comes out with Eat 'Em and Smile. And AC/DC comes out with Who Made Who. And so you have all these bands like that have kind of, a lot of people feel like they lost their way. And so you've got all these things going on, but what don't we have? Straight ahead, right down the middle, rock and roll was gone. That year, you had all this pop metal that was just taken over. Like I just said, Slippery When Wet, Final Countdown, Look What the Cat Dragged In. Even Night Songs by Cinderella came out that year. And when you look at those guys, even though they weren't really pop metal, they did have that element in there. And then you have the thrash metal over on the other side, and then you have all these kind of traditional bands that have kind of lost their way. And so there's this opening right there for let's get back to basics rock and roll. And one of the things that Tesla offered was that. It wasn't any of the spandex. It was just this really solid rock. And when you see the guys, when you see this picture of them, They don't look like any of the stuff that was happening, especially in the pop metal at the time. These guys are all wearing jeans. And look at the cover of Cinderella's Night Songs. And I don't want to knock that album because there's great stuff on that album. But these guys don't fit in that. They don't fit with Poison. They don't fit with Bon Jovi. They don't fit with any of this stuff. And that's why they come in with that song, Modern Day Cowboy. And this album is just filled with just amazing guitar tone. As a matter of fact, when you get to the song, I think it was Too Late for Love right here, it sounds a little bit like something that's a peripheral type AC/DC sound. Even the guitar tones sound like AC/DC. And again, AC/DC had kind of lost their way a little bit at this point. And so there was this opening for a straight ahead rock band. And so Tesla came in and they took it. And that was, I think, part of the reason that when they walked onto the scene, there's so many people going, whoa, rock and roll. It's back. It's here. And they filled that void. Now let's take a look at this album because this cover is actually pretty cool. I loved the colors on this thing, the blue and the green, the way they alternated. And of course that, when you look at it, it's just a blurry version of the Earth, which is what's right there. But there's something really, really interesting about this logo that probably gets overlooked a lot. When you look at the letters, the T-E-L-A all kind of look like they're part of the same font. And they're just basic blocky looking letters. But then you have this S right in the middle that doesn't look like it belongs with these other letters. Well, there's a reason for this. This S, when you just kind of tilt it a little bit that way, this S is the symbol for alternating current. And when you look back at the history of alternating current versus direct current, you had Nikola Tesla, who was the champion for alternating current, and Thomas Edison, who was the champion for direct current. And because of Nikola Tesla, you have alternating current in your house today. And so it's just kind of a subtle little thing in the name of their band to put the alternating current symbol in the middle of their logo. And another kind of subtle thing they did on this album is if you look up in the corners, you have plus, negative, plus, minus, or positive, negative. And that really is in some small way a symbol of alternating current because you have the polarity kind of alternating in these different corners of the album. Anyway, so that was kind of just a couple little cool subtle things about their logo and about this album cover. And again, when you flip it over, here's the band, and it's kind of I don't know, I thought this was such an odd picture. And but anyway, these two guys right here. So this is Frank Hannon right here. He's one of the guitar players, and then you have Brian Wheat, and he's the bass player. These two guys started this band in Sacramento, California, and then Tommy Scio, he's the other guitarist. He joined the band, and then Jeff Keith, he's the singer. He joined the band after that, and then Troy Lucetta is the drummer, and he was the final person that kind of made up the classic lineup of Tesla. And I actually saw these guys opening up for Def Leppard on the Hysteria tour. If you remember, that's the one that they did in the round. And I'll be honest, I didn't love them in concert, but they were still just a really solid rock and roll outfit. And they kind of became famous, like I said, at that moment because of what they had to offer at that time. Let's take a look on the inside real quick so you can see what the inside of the record looks like. And then I've got something really cool to show you over here. So on the inside of the record, this is obviously a picture of Nikola Tesla, and this is like a Tesla coil, and you can see all the sparks coming off of it right there. And then on the other side, and this is kind of a cool thing. I remember when I got this album, they have kind of a bio of the band right here that just kind of tells the story of where they came from. And then, of course, they have just some special thanks and the band members and that kind of thing over there. And so anyway, this was kind of I thought this was, again, this cover was really just the colorful nature of it. I thought was pretty cool. So, and interestingly, so again, the track list, I'll tell you one other thing about this. So Modern Day Cowboy, of course, everybody remembers that song. And it had there was something pretty fascinating about it, especially at the beginning. Because if you remember how that song started, it starts out with this hit, bop, and it goes, and then the guitar, instead of going straight into the kind of the riff, it goes, da-da-da-da-da-da-ba. It doesn't sound like my tongue like that, but you remember bump, da-na-na-na, da-na-na, da-na-na. It was so cool. And it was partly cool because they did this weird thing with the timing. And it was almost like they started on 3, a 1, 2, 3, 4 hit, and then that's when the riff started. So, but they did that build up on the 3, and then other musicians can explain it, but they do this weird thing with the time signature. Like there's a couple of times through that intro where they do half measures. It's pretty neat. And then the tune was just so cool. And Jeff Keith's voice was so powerful. There was something about the way that he sang, man. It was so gritty and it was so raw. And like I said, that raw grittiness is what just really brought this thing, just made this thing really pop. Now, but there's one other thing that really stood out to me about this record, and I think it's this very important principle about just rock music in general, especially the electric guitar. If you go to this song, Too Late for Love, which I think I mentioned a minute ago, has kind of this AC/DC sound to it. If you get towards the end of the song, they go into this guitar solo. But what is so great about this guitar solo is the chaos in the guitar solo. Now, I have this kind of feeling about the electric guitar. There is a place for the Guthrie Govins. I don't know if you heard of him, but he's with the band called the Aristocrats. I went and saw them once, and he is one of the most precise, amazing guitar players you will ever hear in your life. I remember just sitting there, and it was a very small venue. I think there's maybe 200 people there, and I'm up next to the stage watching this guy going, what in the world is he doing? It's so incredible watching this guy. So you've got people like him and John Petrucci who just are these precision players. And it's just, they're like virtuosos at the instrument. And that's got its place. But the thing, in my opinion, that makes the electric guitar so special is the chaos. It's that chaotic element where it feels like everything's just a little bit out of control. It's the feeling of, I'm driving through a mountain road and there's ice on the road and I'm going a little bit too fast and there's no guardrails next to the cliff. And you feel the car going a little bit out of control. To me, that's when the electric guitar really, really shines, because it has this element of it's just a little bit out of control. Jimi Hendrix would often do that because he would make all these sounds with his guitar that were just going beyond just the playing the solos and being in the right key and whatever. It was the wildness of it. Hang on just a second, this will be really quick. With hundreds of videos on our channel now, we've made playlists to make it easy for you to find whatever the thing is that you're interested in. We have a playlist with all of our Rush videos, Kiss, Led Zeppelin, Van Halen. We have categories like 80s metal and even our popular magazine flip-throughs, where we go through page by page with Circus Magazine, Hit Parader, and others, all in 4K resolution. You'll find it all organized and ready to explore. Just click the playlist tab on our channel's homepage. All right, back to the video. I mean, think about Eddie Van Halen. That first album, the first song on the first album, Running with the Devil. The first thing that we hear from Eddie Van Halen is not anywhere in the normal place that you play your guitar. He does that tink, that chinky sound, and the way you normally get that kind of sound is down between the bridge and the tailpiece. And some people think it's up at the headstock. I don't think that's where he played it. I think it was down there, because I had a guitar, and Les Pauls have this, that have that little space, and it has that plinky sound. But the point is, wherever he played it, the point is, it was introducing this, I'm doing things differently and I'm introducing chaos into this music. I'm approaching this thing totally differently. And when you listen to Eruption, all the precision in that thing, it feels wild. With the whammy bar, and there's these moments in there where you go, oh my gosh, it's so cool. And one of the things that they do in this song, Too Late for Love, and part of the reason that I love this, go listen to that solo that's near the end of this song, and it's chaos. And that's part of what, in my opinion, makes the electric guitar such a wonderful instrument. Because when you look at fast, precise playing, there are a lot of people that play the violin that are virtuosos that could keep up with a lot of precise, amazing guitar players. But you don't have a whammy bar on a violin. You can't play in those weird places. You don't bend the neck. You don't do all these things that create these other sounds. And one of the things that makes a band like this so great is that raw rock and roll electric guitar energy. And the guitar tones they had on this album were absolutely top shelf. There were so many bands around this time that had these overly buzzy electric guitar sounds, and these guys didn't. It was reminiscent of that fantastic AC/DC tones that they would get, where it just had this raw energy. And that, I think, is why this was embraced so much, because there was really good songwriting. It was solid playing, but it had pure rock energy. And I think that was partly why this was so great, and why even today, people look back and people go, man, Tesla, they were such a great band. And they were. They were solid. They had this great stuff. And so what I'm going to share with you right now that I think you're going to find really cool is I found a newspaper article from March 6th of 1987. So now you're talking about 3 months after this album came out. And it's really cool listening to what they have to say here. And if you look on the screen, you'll see that there's the band right there. Same thing. There's Jeff Keith right in the middle. You've got Tommy Skeoch. And it's interesting. That is how you pronounce his name. Believe it or not, Tommy Skeoch on the left, Brian Wheat, he's the bass player right there, second over, and then Troy Luccketta there, and then on the very end you have Frank Hannon, who's the other guitar player. And so check this out. I think this just tells a little bit about who they were and what they were thinking at the time. And I think this is so fascinating. Okay, so Tesla bolts up rock's charts. Tesla has zipped up the rock charts so quickly, its lead singer, Jeff Keith, can't keep track of its progress. We're number 13, he says when told of the group's debut on Rolling Stone's Top 50 Albums chart. That's great. It's always easy to find Billboard or any of those other magazines in SAC, but we're never really sure where we are. So, and it even explains it here. SAC, for the uninitiated, is Sacramento, California, home of the 5-man X bar band. Hot on the club circuit, then under the name City Kid. And so they had been playing, like it said, under the name City Kid, but they actually had a name before that called Earthshaker. Now, notice, of course, in true 80s fashion, Kid is not K-I-D, it's K-I-D-D. One of those 80s things, why, I don't know, they had to always spell things just slightly off. Tesla attracted attention from Geffen Records slightly more than 2 years ago. Representatives for the company said they liked the group's hard rock sound and eagerly signed the 5, ranging in age from 20 to 28, to a long-term recording contract. The Californians went into the studio and, in the process of recording, tackled the name issue. Quote, our old name was an all right club band name, but it wasn't a name we wanted to use to go out and rock the world, Keith says. The group's managers combed various lists and came up with Tesla, the last name of Nikola Tesla, an inventor who made advances in the field of high voltage and frequency apparatus. When we heard what he had done, Keith says, we thought the name was good. It's catchy in a way that no one knows what in the hell it means. That grabs them right there. And it's true. Like I said, so few of us, some of us had heard it in physics class or we'd seen the Zap show, but it was just, what is this? But then we bought the album and immediately we know the name Nikola Tesla. Okay, so let's see here. To further the Tesla's ties, the group's debut album is called Mechanical Resonance, a reference to the inventor's theory that the Earth could be split open like an apple if mechanical resonance were applied. Lightning bolts flying across the album cover solidify the theme. Thanks to MTV, Keith says, the group's name got a big boost before it was introduced on tour. When Keith, bassist Brian Wheat, guitarist Frank Hannon, and Tommy Skeoch, and drummer Troy Luccketta opened for David Lee Roth, they already had a following. Quote, it surprised us how many people were there to see us, he says. It made things much easier. And I think I just mentioned a minute ago that, of course, David Lee Roth and Van Halen, this is when they were putting those new albums out. He was putting out Eat 'Em and Smile. Van Halen's putting out 5150. And a lot of people in that moment, they go, what do we do with this? Van Halen was kind of changing up who they were. David Lee Roth was trying to stay with the Van Halen sound, bringing in Steve Vai. And anyway, it was just a little bit of a confusing moment at that point. Let's see. The 5 learned a little about show business from Roth. He's a hell of a businessman. And tried writing songs for their next album. And that would have been, boy, an education going on tour at that point. Your first album, you're out on tour with David Lee Roth, and he was, of course, the show. He was a showman as good as you can get. Touring was great. It turned out to be better than I thought it would, Keith says. It's not all partying like people think, but it is fun, unquote. Now, preparing to join Alice Cooper on tour, stopping in Sioux City Wednesday, Tesla has another video for the single Little Susie, ready to air and enough material to fill a second album. And Little Susie, that ended up actually being a pretty big hit. I remember hearing that thing just all the time. And I didn't love it, but it did have that kind of raw rock and roll energy, which was pretty cool. And they had a music video for it, and it did go kind of all over the place. When we finish with Alice, Keith says, we'll think about catching some major tour in the summer. As the five guys from Sacramento figure it, they can put their hometown on the map if they keep doing the kind of music that got them the contract in the first place. Music, they say, quote, that comes from the gut. And again, that was kind of the point I was making a few minutes ago. They had this kind of this thing that was missing at the time. The AC/DC raw rock and roll gut level energy it wasn't really represented there when you had these two sides of heavy metal kind of pushing in different directions, and then Tesla comes in right down the middle, straight ahead rock and roll, and we were all on board for it. Keith, a former transfer truck driver, attributes a good deal of Tesla's early success to luck. There are a lot of good bands out there who are better than us. We just got a lot of big breaks. And that's probably always true with rock bands, of course. But again, like I said, they did have something that was noticeably missing at that moment. We worked hard for it, but we know how easily it can disappear. The five have seen other Sacramento bands shoot up to the top and vanish. They're determined to break the trend. And interestingly, they did manage to stick around for a while because they had other things. And then it was, I don't know when it was. It seems like it was just a few years later when they put out the song Signs, that five-man acoustical jam, and they based it on the five-man electrical band. I don't remember exactly how that was, but you remember the song Signs. That thing was everywhere. I remember MTV, that thing was on rotation. I think they were playing it every other song when that came out. I mean, it was so big. So they did manage that. This was not just in and out kind of thing. They stuck around, and they continued to be successful. Let's see. I've dreamed of playing music, but I never knew nothing about bands, Keith admits. Now that he's in one of the hottest new ones, he's not about to pass up an opportunity to learn everything possible. Working with Cooper, he says, should be a real experience. Quote, I'm curious to see the crowd. It's got to be a little different. And yes, the Alice Cooper crowd is going to be a little bit different than the David Lee Roth crowd they were playing for, to be sure. Still, the 28-year-old says, I was a big Alice Cooper fan in junior high and high school, so he knows the veteran rocker just has to be good. And then they wrote this article, of course, because they were in town to play with Alice Cooper at the Municipal Auditorium. And that actually came from the Sioux City Journal, like I said, March 6th of 1987. So they had a really, really amazing career. And this album, ultimately, it took a couple of years, but the album went platinum. And still, it reverberates around today. There are people around today that look back and go, man, that was just one of the great bands out of the 80s. They had this amazing album that seemed like it just kind of came out of nowhere. And like I said earlier, it kind of fit a void that we had at that moment. And I'd really love to hear what you have to say about that. Did it kind of strike you the same way? Do you remember when this came out? And for you, did it hit you in that way where you think, man, we're missing this right now, and it filled that void, and it gave us something. I remember when I took this thing home, and it just felt like raw, awesome rock and roll energy. So anyway, I'd love to get your feedback on that. What were your thoughts on this? Did you ever see them in concert? I saw them that one time. That was the only time I saw them, and you also have to grade on the curve. When you're an opening band, you don't have all the luxuries that the headliner does. And also, when you're playing in the round like that, that's it's a novelty. It's a cool thing to do. but it is a tough thing to be successful in the round. That is a tough thing to manage, and there's not a lot of bands and performers that can actually pull that off. So they had a couple of things against them when I saw them. So if you've seen them at other times, I'd love to hear about that. What was your experience like? What was it like seeing these guys in concert? And also, please, if you're not following the channel already, please follow the channel, like the video, and if you like this, I bet you know somebody else that would like this too. And so please share this video, click that little share button, email it to some people, send it to them over Messenger, go put it on your Facebook timeline, put it on X. We really, really appreciate that when you do that. A lot of people are contacting us through various means right now, asking us what they can do, how they can help the channel. That's the biggest way you can help it, is just share this with other people, and we'll continue to kind of grow this fraternity that we have going on this channel right now. And so with that, have yourself fantastic day.